call to order this session of the Tacoma Park City Council. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Stewart.
Here.
Councilmember Kovar.
Here.
Councilmember Dabala. Here. Councilmember Costick. Here. Councilmember Siemens.
Present.
Councilmember Smith. Councilmember Searcy.
He's here. All right. We are all here this evening. Let's see, our agenda for tonight does not change. Looking to the future, next Wednesday evening, September 26th, we just had an administrative function session to discuss the city manager's yearly evaluation. We will have another one of those sessions next Wednesday at 6 p.m. When we come back for our regular meeting at 7:30, our voting session will be a first reading ordinance approving traffic calming for Hilltop Road. First reading, nope, that's this week. Never mind. I'm sorry. October 3rd.
It's pretty close.
Yes. It's very similar. October 3rd is next Wednesday at 7:30. We have a public hearing on Community Development Block Grant Program that will start our meeting. Then that's followed by a presentation from International Dark Skies regarding the city's conversion to LED streetlights. IDA Director Jim Doherty will be here. We will then have a report on our city's energy efficiency efforts from our sustainability manager, Gina Mathias. And for the record, we will have a proclamation on Energy Efficiency Day, which is October 5th, and a proclamation for Indigenous Peoples Day on October 8th. Our voting session the evening of October 3rd is a second reading ordinance approving traffic calming for Hilltop Road. Second reading ordinance approving payment in lieu of taxes agreement for 126 and 128 Lee Avenue. A single reading ordinance authorizing the purchase of Adobe licenses. Our work session on October 3rd is a meeting with the Commemoration Commission, recognition programs, and other projects. We met with them on Monday evening, and this is a continuation of our conversation. A review of housing component of draft housing and economic development strategic plan as we start getting back to our housing and economic development strategic plan. And then I think this is tentative, but a process for reviews of the tree ordinance and tree canopy goals. So just to kind of lay out where we're going on that. On Wednesday, October 10th, there is no city council meeting. A number of council members will be attending the Maryland Municipal League meeting, and so we will not have a meeting on October 10th. Coming back on Wednesday, October 17th, our meeting will be here at 7:30 p.m. We'll have a work session that will be a discussion of legislative priorities for the session that will start in Annapolis in January. Continue our discussion of housing component of the draft housing and economic development strategic plan, and a discussion of the Community Development Block Grant Program. And that'll take us then to October 24th. All right. That's our agenda items. And just to remind everyone, you can always see our agenda on the city's website. Now we'll start with public comments on voting items. Our first voting item this evening is the first reading ordinance approving traffic comment for Hilltop Road between Geneva Avenue and Mississippi Avenue. Do we have any public comments on that? Please come to the podium. Please state your name and where you live, and you have 3 minutes.
Go?
Yep, you're good to go.
Great. Giuseppe Cimino, 303 Hilltop Road between Geneva and Maple Avenues since 1989. I'm asking you to please vote no on this item as written. We already have 2 raised crosswalks in Hilltop in that 2-block area. During the community meeting that we held in August, we discussed various traffic calming options, including making the stop sign at Mississippi from 2-way to 3-way, as well as painting a center line on Hilltop Road. As noted in the agenda item, the environmental considerations are particularly important because Hilltop is adjacent to the hiker-biker trail in Sligo Creek right there. So again, I'm asking you to please vote no on this as written. I ask that the council not ignore the input and first look at installing some of the other measures that were talked about during the community meeting. Once those options have been installed, if additional measures are deemed necessary, then I think we could look at doing a speed bump instead. But I see nothing in here that speaks about those other options. And as I read it here, we talk about 2/3 of the households on the block on either side. I represent 2/3, 303 and 305 Hilltop on the adjacent block. And in my signing of that petition, I specifically excluded a speed bump as one of the options that I would support. So I just want to make note of that, please, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Do we have any other comments on the first reading ordinance approving traffic calming for Hilltop Road between Geneva Avenue and Mississippi Avenue? Okay, seeing none, our second voting item is the first reading ordinance approving payments in lieu of taxes agreement for 126 and 128 Lee Avenue. This is Coalition Homes. Any comments on that? All right, seeing none, we'll go to our next item. It's the second reading ordinance amending Chapter 3.04 Ethics of the Tacoma Park Code. Any comments on that? Seeing none, we'll move to our next voting item. It's a resolution approving the City of Tacoma Park settlement with Fairview Investment Fund for the preservation of the 2.68 acres of land known as Dorothy Woods. Any public comments on that? Okay, seeing none, our final voting item tonight is a consent agenda. It includes a single reading ordinance authorizing the purchase of digital signage for the interior of the community center, a resolution providing for appointments to the Ethics Committee, and a resolution for appointments to the Committee on the Environment. Do we have any public comments on that? Okay, seeing none, we will now move to our voting session. The first item is the first reading ordinance approving traffic calming for Hilltop Road between Geneva Avenue and Mississippi Avenue. We did have a public hearing on this in a work session in the last few weeks. Would someone like to move this first reading ordinance?
Move it.
Councilmember Siemens, do I have a second?
Second.
Councilwoman Searcy, a second. Any discussion of this? Councilmember Siemens, would you like to say something?
Yes, I would. I think Giuseppe, during the public comment session, brought up an important point, and that is that when we had the community meeting regarding the traffic problems on Hilltop Avenue, Public Works suggested numerous alternatives for slowing people down. One of those was the speed hump, and I certainly support the speed bump, but I think that Giuseppe's point is that it would be helpful, since the other traffic calming measures that were proposed are not terribly costly or require a great deal of work. If we could implement those first to see what the impact is and then install the speed bump. I think, for example, one of those was the painting of markings on the road to help to slow people down, and kind of a psychological narrowing of the road. And I know that right now it's raining outside and not a particularly good time to paint the road, but I would just ask that the Public Works install those other measures before we actually put in the speed bump.
So would you like the council to
Go
vote
ahead and
for this, pass this?
Pass this, but with Public Works cooperation, that we try the other measures and see the impact of those, with the idea that the speed bump may not be necessary, or it may continue to be necessary, but we'll know after we see the results of those other measures.
Just to make sure we're giving,
The Public Works, Ms. Braithwaite may, since she was at the meeting, she's much more familiar with the problem than my colleagues, so appreciate your feedback on that.
Sure, we had offered to do lane edge and enhance the stop bars and put in a center line to really make the lanes appear narrow and really well-defined. One thought is we could put those in. The police department did the original traffic counts and identified the speed issues as well as the volume of cars, so we could put those measures in, ask the police department to run another several-day traffic count test for speed, see if there's any difference, and if there is an appreciable difference in the percentage of speeding cars, we could then not move forward with speed bumps. If there is, then we could move forward with speed bumps. I don't know if you want to clarify that in the resolution or in the ordinance itself, or if we want to just table the ordinance until that work is done, and then you could bring it back up.
I would prefer passing the resolution now with that modification in there if it's required.
Okay, so we don't have the language, but we can bring back the language in the second
That's right.
ordinance.
She can bring it back for the second reading.
Yeah, just, would you like to move an amendment to that effect, just to make sure our colleagues are?
Yes, I would like to move that with the amendment as described, and I'll leave it to the city clerk to provide the wording.
Okay, Councilwoman Searcy, are you okay with that, since you seconded the
Yes.
ordinance? All right, great. Councilwoman Costick, do you have a comment?
That was one of my questions. That was answered. I also wanted to know, in terms of the budget and the queue for this, so if this ordinance passes, we don't, this isn't necessarily going in right away. This is part of a queue for other traffic calming requests, is that right?
It is, but this is very minor, and so it's not like it's a really long queue. I mean, it's real different than our sidewalk installations or something
Okay.
else like that. So it has to do more with good weather and, you know, are
Okay.
people in the neighborhood at that time or that kind of thing. I think that's a more accurate, it's not the kind of standard queue.
The only other project that I'm currently aware of, and I might be missing something, is the Flower Avenue, Sligo Creek Parkway traffic calming
Right.
plan, which is fairly extensive, will be very expensive, and because it's on park and planning land, requires their cooperation and coordination. We have the full design set completed. We've submitted to park and planning. We're waiting for their comments. That one will also require state of Maryland permits because we'll be impacting the waterway, so there's certain times of the year where we have to do that. So that would be a summer project. I think you can start the work after June, if I'm not mistaken, there's a window of time. So that's the only other traffic calming measure that I'm aware of that's currently in the queue. We have a couple of outstanding issues. Houston Avenue, of course, would be another one, and then Kansas Avenue, the one-way there. We've never had the public hearing in regard to that, so.
But I'm hopeful that this is something that can be done in the near term.
Yeah, this, with the speed hump, it's basically just scheduling our asphalt contractor to be able, you know, when they're doing
then-
asphalt.
But the other
Well,
items,
the other items
can
first.
go faster than that.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, sure, the line edge painting is something we can do in-house. and-
Weather-related.
Yeah, we're just waiting for it to stop raining for a little while,
Yeah.
then we'll do it.
Great,
Yeah,
terrific.
I would like us to move away from speed bumps as much as possible, so I like the idea that Councilmember Siemens
This gives us an
proposed.
idea of how
Mhm.
successful it is.
So the amendment, what does the amendment say?
So we'll bring it back, we'll bring the
Okay.
language back for second reading, but it would simply indicate that these other measures would be tried first.
And the speed
and-
bump would not go in unless,
And,
if an improvement were,
if there were documented
found.
improvement, and I think it would need to come to council, I think, again, if there was some indication that one way or the other was, especially if a speed hump were to be installed.
okay. Thank you.
All right. And so this does come back to us for a second reading, and so we'll get that language. And so for tonight, all those in favor of the first reading ordinance authorizing traffic calming on Hilltop Road between Geneva Avenue and Mississippi, as proposed amended by Councilmember Siemens. Oh, I'm sorry. You were getting ready for the next one, okay. I got to vote on this one before you can comment on the next one. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? All right, we'll see this one again.
And thank you to my colleagues.
All right. And thank you for coming tonight. Next is a first reading ordinance approving payment in lieu of taxes for 126 and 128 Lee Avenue. Again, we had the work session on this a couple of weeks ago. Would someone like to move this ordinance?
Sure.
The Councilmember Siemens moved, Councilwoman DeValla seconded. Councilwoman DeValla?
Thank you for waking me up.
That's okay.
No, I don't have any comments right
Okay.
now.
Great. Councilmember Kovar?
Thank you. We talked about this when we did the work session, but it's an area that I'm a little bit unclear about. So, and I'm looking at the city manager if that's the correct direction to look. There was talk about how the current impact on revenues is a fairly small number, but that there would be some type of change when the reassessment occurred. And I didn't really understand, I think, will that mean that more money will come into the city? Will it mean that similarly corresponding high amount will be withheld because the same percentage requirement would apply? So
So-
maybe you could just
Sure,
sort of
so-
outline that a little bit. Thanks.
The way that assessments are done, often if the property is vacant and a lot of work is needed, it's not assessed at a high level. Once it gets to be renovated and occupied, it will be assessed at a much higher level. And so the percentage of the pilot would continue, so they would be paying more money, but they would be saving more money. So we just don't know what those numbers are.
So the amount of revenue we'll sacrifice just in absolute terms
It's
could
greater.
get substantially higher,
It
but
will
in the
be.
same proportion of,
That's right.
that will realize in higher revenue as
That's
well
right.
because of the higher assessment.
That's
Okay.
right.
So, but we can't really estimate at this point what that is because we just don't know what the value of the property will be.
That's right. We've done some discussions, but we really don't have good numbers for you.
So the only other thing I would say, and my colleagues may or may not agree with me, obviously, when we get into the housing strategic plan, I think it's really important that we develop a policy on how we're going to do the pilots as opposed to, I'm not against the pilots per se, and I think that's one of the more important ways we're able to provide affordable housing now and ensure that they're there. So I support this project and I'm voting for it. But I'd like us not to have a lot more pilots until we have a chance to talk about the policy. And I don't know whether there's any other ones out there, but I think we're doing them ad hoc as they come up as opposed to seeing how they fit in with our.
That's true. It certainly, it's a major part of the discussion to come with on the housing
Yeah.
strategic plan.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry. All right, seeing no other, Councilwoman Searcy, sorry.
Sorry, no, sorry. So I just want to echo Councilmember Kovar in the importance of us really taking a long, hard look at how the pilots not only serve as an incentive for the creation of affordable housing or the increase of affordable housing stock in the city, but I also, as brought up before, raised some concerns about how do we also ensure the quality of the housing stock that exists, and to what extent are pilots helping to increase the housing stock, but also to what extent can we use these tax breaks as a stick when we receive feedback that perhaps developers are not upholding their part of the deal, which is not only maintaining affordable housing, but also ensuring the quality of the housing once residents move in. So again, I just want to reiterate the importance of us taking a long, hard look at the pilot program and some ways in which we can make sure that we're not only increasing the stock in terms of providing these tax incentives, but ways in which we could perhaps levy the pilots as a way to ensure quality housing in the city. Thanks.
Great. All those in favor of the first reading ordinance approving payment in lieu of taxes agreement for 126 and 128 Lee Avenue, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstain? All right. The next item is the second reading ordinance amending Chapter 3.04 of the Ethics of the Tacoma Park Code. This is our second reading ordinance of this. Would someone like to move it?
Sure.
Councilwoman DeBala moved. Do I have a second? Councilwoman, nobody wants to move anything tonight. Councilmember Kovar. I don't believe this has changed since the last time it came before us. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Our city attorney is with us. All right, seeing none, since this is the second reading ordinance, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll.
Councilmember Kovar.
Aye.
Councilmember DeBala.
Aye.
Councilmember Costick. Councilmember Siemens.
Aye.
Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy. Mayor Stewart.
Yes, thank you very much. The next item is resolution approving the City of Tacoma Park settlement with Fairview Investment for the preservation of 2.68 acres of land known as Dorothy Woods. Would someone like to, we have a revised version of the resolution that Councilwoman DeBala, it's in your blue folder,
Blue folder, it has revised in the upper right corner.
just so for the
And-
folks following along at home. The changes were in the whereas clause on the environmental, in recognition of the importance of the environmental and climate change benefits. So we added climate change as Councilwoman DeBala's suggestion. And then the final whereas clause included a new phrase that says, as well as to residents citywide for their investment of volunteer time to maintain the woods over the past 3 years, so that we could also thank the volunteers for that and recognize their efforts. So those are the two items that have been changed since it was put up on the city website. So would someone like to move this?
I would like to move this.
Councilwoman DeValla moves it. Councilman Smith seconded it. Any discussion on this one? Councilwoman DeValla.
Just to thank once again the residents who've put a lot of effort into this property, primarily through sweat and tears, as well as through donations, contributions both 3 years ago and again today.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your efforts on this. Councilwoman Searcy.
I want to thank all of the residents that donated, but I would be remiss if I didn't reiterate some of the concerns that I have regarding the process in which was taken to get to this point. I think it's important for people to understand that there are a number of inequities in terms of the access to public space in the city of Takoma Park. There are definitely differences in terms of open space availability as well as placemaking. Where Dorothy's Woods is located is actually one of the wards within the city that has some of the most city-owned placemaking opportunities, and there are other segments of the city that don't have any. And so as we are making decisions such as these, especially as it pertains to not just how we are leveraging volunteer dollars, but how we are actually allocating taxpayer dollars, that we keep in mind ensuring the equitable distribution of amenities throughout the city. And so to the racial equity considerations for Dorothy's Woods, specifically making sure that we're assessing the impact of redirecting funds in the budget to fund Dorothy's Woods and the impact it would have on residents of color. We should, as a council, make sure that we are not taking taxpayer dollars that would have otherwise been used to improve or make infrastructural changes in other parts of the city that currently don't have the same level of public amenities to pay for the city's portion of Dorothy's Woods. I think it's important for us to also identify potential locations of public parks and open spaces that are currently in underserved areas of the city. I know one thing that is on the agenda to talk about during the work session today is a number of projects that are underway, and one of which is the open space management plan. So really taking a long, hard look at where are the open spaces, not just where they are currently, but where they may potentially be in the future, and how can we ensure that there's an equitable distribution of those. And then also making sure that we're encouraging and facilitating programming and use of Dorothy's Woods by residents across the city. One thing that we want to make sure of is that this isn't residents in a particular area who are able to raise $100,000 in a relatively short amount of time were able to influence how taxpayer dollars were spent for a private park. So really just making sure that city staff are working not just with the residents that have donated, but to also help other residents throughout the city realize the benefits and potential volunteer opportunities and ways in which particularly youth in some of these wards that don't have open space could benefit from Dorothy's Woods. So I can't stress enough the importance of making sure we could talk about racial equity all day long, but actions like this is where the rubber hits the road in terms of ensuring that we're not perpetuating and encouraging increasing disparities to exist within the city. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, and thank you, Councilwoman Searcy, for pointing out the racial equity considerations. As we discussed as a city council over the summer, we are moving more in the direction of having our racial equity consideration statements more reflective like this, and so this was one of our first opportunities to do that. Councilwoman DeValla?
Yeah, I neglected to say that those conversations have already started. And I would like to announce that there'll be a Cub Scout, the second annual. Not that the Cub Scouts themselves are guaranteed to be reflective of everybody, but they're going to come out again December 8th in the morning with gloves. Yeah, it's a little chilly for a work session with on the property.
Thank you. All right, all those in favor of the resolution, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? 6 ayes, 1 nay. All right, moving on to our consent agenda. Would someone like to move the consent agenda?
Move.
Councilmember Siemens, do I have a second? Councilwoman Costick. Since there is a single reading ordinance in the consent agenda, does the clerk want to call the roll?
Councilmember Kovar,
Aye.
Councilmember DeBala,
Aye.
Councilmember Costick, Councilmember Siemens,
Aye.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy, Mayor Stewart.
Yes. All right, now we have public comments on other items, so.
Before we have
any-
public comments, can I just ask if
Yeah.
we're allowed to have mobile mics so that we can go out into the audience? Like our
Oh.
council member?
No,
Kovar?
we're not doing that.
Okay. Darn.
I don't know what he's doing, but we're moving on. Public comments, anyone have comments on any other topics this evening?
Thanks for coming on such bad weather. By the way, the light in front of the fire station is blinking yellow if you're going on 410, just a warning. Mary Jane Matui, Ward 2. I'm here there's talking about racial equity. You're talking about apartments. How come there's no racial equity when it comes to buying homes and staying in homes? I've noticed in my neighborhood, one of the few neighborhoods, I guess, in Tacoma Park that still has significant black population. And I really like it. That's why I moved there, because there's white and black people living next to each other. And my son is biracial, and I really like that. But why is it all the people who are buying the houses are white people, and all the people probably selling these houses, these developers who I cannot stand, are probably white, and they're the ones making money out of it. I mean, I hate to see all the black people in the apartments and then the white people in the houses. And anyways, the gentrification really bothers me. And I also see it in the council thing, because, the council, you don't get paid enough. You should be paid a full-time salary, including the mayor. You should be paid, Kate should be paid as much as Suzanne, because she does just as much work as far as I can see. And it's wrong, because you have to have another source of income, which means you're probably upper middle class white, more higher chance, not necessarily, to be a council member, because you have to have more money and you have to be independent, wealthy, enough to run and stay, because you don't get paid enough on the job. And that's my feelings about, and also for people with disabilities, we also are screwed too when it comes to economics. And I almost flunked economics in college, but I can see that happening. I can see the black people in the apartments and the white people moving in the houses. And you don't have to be an A in economics to see that happening. And I just don't like to see it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Matui. Any other public comments this evening? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to council comments. Anyone? You guys are awfully shy tonight. Councilmember Kovar?
A few announcements. One, over the weekend, there were 2 successful events. I'm not sure what it indicates about me. They were both food-oriented. We had the Beer Fest on Saturday and the pie contest on Sunday. I think I saw the mayor at both of those, and maybe other people. But the good thing is the funds went from the Beer Fest to the Tacoma Foundation, which of course benefits a number of organizations in the community, and the pie contest, the sales of the pie, pieces of pie after the fact to lower income people connected to the farmers market and the Old Town Business Association. So 2 great examples. 2 other things I wanted to mention. 2 days ago was National Voter Registration Day, and I was very pleased that our local Board of Elections had tables set up in 3 different locations. I actually stopped by briefly and saw them, not 2 days ago, yesterday, saw them at the Metro station and also at Montgomery College, and I believe they also had a third one at Washington Adventist University, and they were registering modest numbers of people. And if you need to register to vote still, you can go to www.777vote.org. Also go to our local Board of Elections on the city website, and you can get directed to where you need to go. So we need everybody to register to vote. And lastly, I just want to say the next charrette connected to the Montgomery College Math Science Building is this coming Tuesday, which is October 2nd at 7 p.m. at the Performing Arts Building, which is where the others have been held on Georgia Avenue and on the Silver Spring side of the Tacoma Park Silver Spring campus. And so anyone who's concerned about the design and appearance of that future building should attend the charrette meeting. Thank you.
Councilman Searcy?
Good evening, everyone. So first, I want to thank those residents that came out to the LED tour that was last Thursday. And thank you, Daryl, for walking us around. It was very, very educational. We might get rained out tomorrow, but I'll triple check. So thank you to those who were able to attend. Also, had a wonderful time last night with Sarah Daines and Kaylee Ganud of the Tacoma Langley Crossroads Development Authority at the University of Maryland's Purple Line Planning Studio. We had an opportunity to talk to a number of students there who are working on a project around trying to come up with some design concepts and studies around ways in which to develop the stretch of University Boulevard and particularly Langley Park in the Crossroads area. So that was a really wonderful exchange. The students were extremely bright, asked so many questions. We could have talked all night. So that was a wonderful exchange. And also would like to thank Prince George's Council member Denny Tavares and her staff today, along with Purple Line Transit partners. We had an opportunity, Kaylee and I, to join them on the tour of the Purple Line route on the Prince George's side of the Crossroads area. And one of the big takeaways in terms of trying to not only work with the Purple Line contractors to develop signage around those businesses that will be open and directional signage, but also in working with their new Northern Gateway CDC, I believe is a nonprofit designed to really try to help bring together all of the various businesses that are in what Prince George's County has categorized as a Northern Gateway. So it was a really wonderful exchange, lots of ideas shared on ways in which we can ensure that there is some synergy between the various businesses on both sides of University Boulevard. So that was a wonderful exchange as well. So thanks. Oh, night market.
I was gonna say.
Night market. It is here. It's here. It is this Saturday. Come to night market at 4:30 Ann Street.
And I double checked, the tilapia sliders will be there.
Awesome.
Tilapia sliders. Speaking of
They're
food-related
very good.
activities.
I know. Councilwoman Devala.
Yeah, a few things. Tomorrow, I'll be having my office hours from 5 to 6:30 at Spring Mills Bakery, followed by the long-anticipated Lincoln Sidewalks meeting, 7:30 here at the Community Center, and I am really happy about that one. Next week, I'll be out of town, so I'll be calling in for the City Council meeting, just to let everybody know. And last but not least, it was Council of Governments Week. So I represent the city in 2 areas. One is the Chesapeake Bay Planning Council, and there was a joint meeting with states and EPA. It was, we went over the midpoint assessment for the long-term plan for the Chesapeake Bay. We talked about what still needs to happen, In a nutshell, it's climate change and Conowingo Dam, which is a dam that has a lot of sediment built up behind it. But the message for Tacoma Park is climate change, climate change. The other COG meeting that I attended was a combined meeting of the energy group and the air group, the air quality group. And this morning we put out 2 letters to the administration on 2 proposed rulemakings on the energy side. In both cases, pretty critical of the proposals because they don't help either air quality or energy efficiency in this region. One is the proposed revisions to the fuel economy standards and carbon dioxide tailpipe emissions, and the other is the revisions to replace the Clean Power Plan. And that's it. Thank you.
Councilman Costick.
Thank you. I also have an update on one of the COG committees. I spent much of Friday in the Transportation Planning Board meeting. We've had first a work session and then our formal meeting to get a presentation on Visualize 2045, which I've mentioned before, is the long-range transportation plan for the entire region. And it is open currently for public comments, I believe through October 7th. I would encourage people to take a look at it. It is rather dense, but it includes a lot of information about demographics and projections in the area in terms of the expected population growth, the growth of population in terms of distribution throughout the region, accessibility by car and transportation, public transportation to jobs within about a 45-minute trip. Has some very interesting information about the current situation and the projected for 2045. It also includes several initiatives that we in Tacoma Park support and have done some work to bring ourselves closer to, things like bringing jobs and housing closer together, making more walkable and bikeable access to bus stops and metro stations, and the bus rapid transit as well, which part of the project has aspirational goals as well as financially constrained goals that the state dots, the MDOT and VDOT and DDOT, all intend to do and have money allotted to. And one of those things is the New Hampshire Avenue BRT project, which is a real positive. On the downside, there are also some things in it that I think need some improvement. Councilmember DiBallo was talking about air quality. There are some aspects of that we're still reviewing and I think could be improved, possibly not this year, hopefully in the next long-range plan. And one of the projects in the plan is also the expansion of the Beltway express lanes in Maryland as well. So there's pros and cons in the document. So I'd encourage you to take a look at it and provide your feedback. You can go to www.mcog.org/visualize2045 and provide your comments there, or you can also share them with me directly.
Is it MWCOG?
It's MWCOG. Thank you. And then I also wanted to note that I am organizing meetings with the neighborhood associations in Ward 3, so I hope to meet with all of them in the next couple of months and have a chance to talk with residents a little closer to home and hear their concerns and also share information about the council. So I've contacted all of them, but if you want, there's some of them that are more active than others, so if you're listening to this and you want to reach out and help organize for your neighborhood, that would be fabulous. Please do. And then finally, I have been having some trouble with my email. If that's something that we could look into, that would be great. There are a few messages I haven't, again, I've been having some trouble after the original trouble. So also, if anyone has emailed me and I haven't written back, it's possible I didn't get your email, so please do send it again. Thank you.
Great. Councilmember Smith.
Thank you. First thing, this past week, I attended the Montgomery County MML chapter meeting that was hosted by Rockville. It was a very informative meeting. The special guest was Montgomery County's Board of Education. The board has hired a consultant to look at demographic projections. They are aware that there have been problems, and so they are trying to fix it. The first meeting that they're going to discuss the matter with the consultant, NGT, is October 25th, or 29th, October 29th. Next month, we are hosting MML for the Montgomery County chapter. So please, colleagues, that will be, save the date. That will be October 18th,
We must know.
6:15 in this building. Dinner will be served. So please attend.
We must know somebody if it's coming here.
It's really important to make sure we have as many council members at this meeting. Last week, I also attended a lunch sponsored by our consultant, our lobbyist that represents us from Montgomery County, Alexander Cleaver. They did say that they're doing everything possible to staff up. They had special guests, the President of the Senate, Mike Miller, who said that this is going to be a challenging year for Democrats in the state. But it was a really good lunch, and they think that they can continue to represent us. And then finally, I chair the conference planning committee for the Maryland Municipal League, and we had our first meeting on Saturday. 21 elected officials, senior staff members from all over the state are on this committee. I think about 17 attended, people from as far as Fruitland. It was an excellent meeting. I challenged the committee members that this year we will have more municipal towns and cities than ever before at the conference. And we are going to raise more sponsor dollars than ever before. So it was a really good meeting, and the committee only meets 3 times a year to organize this conference. Over 2,000 people attend every year, so it should be really good. Thank you.
Great. Councilmember Siemens?
Thank you, Mayor. It was mentioned earlier about problems with email, and that may be the answer to my question, but several weeks ago when we talked about the traffic calming on Hilltop Road, I had asked for a copy of the easement map for Hilltop Road and also for a record of the traffic enforcement that's been done.
I'm
along
sorry,
the-
I did not get that to you.
Okay,
I'll get it to you.
we'll blame it on the email, thank you.
I'm not, that one wasn't an email problem, I'm sorry.
All right. As Councilmember Kovar mentioned, we did have both the Tacoma Foundation Beer Fest on Saturday, and then apple pie and peach and a couple of others that I'm not sure what they were, but they were good pies. There were 40 entries overall this year for the pie contest, and as Councilmember Kovar mentioned, it did raise about $700 for the Snap Match program. So it was, given the rain, it was a great event. 2 other things to note. One is we have received the long-awaited letter from State Highway Administration Administrator Greg Slater, who, as he promised in a meeting that myself, the city manager, and representatives from the 2 firms that did the traffic studies for Tacoma Junction attended, that SHA is committed to working with the city to develop a vision for Tacoma Junction, and that this will be done out of the administrator's office. So we are glad to receive that, and I think we can maybe put that up on one of the project pages, and we're looking forward to kicking that off. In addition, I know, given that the county council last night was talking about cell towers, we've had a number of residents ask us questions about this. We are going to take it up as council in October. However, thanks to Councilmember Smith, who sent around the information, the FCC did move forward today with an order curtailing local government's authority to regulate the rollout of fifth-generation wireless. So we are evaluating what this decision by the FCC means for us as a municipality. It is just another example of our authority being preempted, and so we will have more discussion about this later in October, but the news today was not good. I think that is it for me. I'll turn it over to the city manager.
Thank you. Just a few items. As Councilmember Smith referenced, there's been some change with our county lobbying firm, Alexander and Cleaver. Our primary lobbyist that was working with us no longer is with the firm. Our contract with Alexander and Cleaver is up in October. For the time being, we plan to enter into a month-to-month contract with the firm. And we also have a request for proposals out to see what other options might be available. And so Alexander and Cleaver is being encouraged to respond, and as are other entities. The request for proposals is available on the city's website. I wanted to note we received a nice donation of $2,600 from Reverend Karen Rasmussen of the nonprofit organization No Child Goes Hungry. She donated that to our police department's youth outreach programming, and that donation was facilitated by our police chaplain, Gail Fisher-Stewart. And so in addition to other forms of thanks to Reverend Rasmussen, we'll be recognizing her with a plaque and a certificate of appreciation at an upcoming event. It was very nice to see that contribution to our efforts to help young people here. And I put in some kudos to Deputy City Manager Jason Demweber. He did a lot of work on the host committee for the ICMA conference that we both just returned from in Baltimore. It was a big lift for a small organization to be the host, and it actually went off pretty well. But a lot of the work was done by just a few people, and Jason was one of them, and really appreciate that contribution to our state organization. And actually went over, despite the rain, which was the one thing that people complained about. The event went very well and was very well received. A lot of people saw Baltimore kind of in a different light than they may have heard about Baltimore, so that was very useful.
And it was the second most highly attended in 104 years of the
Wow.
conference. So
That's
that
right.
was cool too.
Partly because it's an easy place to get to, and the convention center's in walking distance to a lot of things, so it attracted a number of people, but it must have been Jason. Actually, it was the purple shirts. So we had the best shirts ever of an ICMA conference, and those actually sold well too. I just wanted to make a quick note about a hiring update. A couple key positions that we're hiring for are a deputy police chief and a communications specialist, as well as a number of other positions. So please encourage folks to apply if they are interested. We are moving along on those recruitments, but we want the best possible candidates.
Quick question about the positions, because I think a number of them have been open for some time.
Some are continuing, but yeah.
Okay, so in terms of like letting people know how to apply, is it just through the city, or are we marketing and using other tools?
Oh, we do quite extensive marketing. The positions are on our careers site of our city website. However, depending on the position, we target marketing. So there's widespread marketing, but there's also very targeted to certain professional associations from a wide variety of different entities related to that profession, so that we really make sure that we get people's interest who would be appropriate for the position.
Okay, thank you.
Your question?
I do. Thank you very much. One of the past problems that we've had in hiring has been the length of time that it takes to get answers back to the candidates or to the applicants. And I just wondered how that stands now. Are we responding quickly? And the reason I ask is that significantly impacts the quality of the people you end up hiring.
So we we try to move pretty quick. We watch that very carefully, especially on our highest profile candidates. I know that sometimes if there's a strong workload problem going on with one of the department heads that's supposed to also be reviewing the things, that can be a slowdown, and so we try to prod them along because we recognize that we could lose really good candidates.
And additionally, if I may, we have in place more rigorous processes than we have in the
Right.
past, and we have a lot of applicants for certain positions. So people aren't applying and not hearing something back. If they learn relatively quickly if they're moving through. We often have them answer supplemental questions, do phone interviews and things like that before we bring
And they
them
get
in for
automatic
interviews.
responses as well. So as soon as they've entered something, they get a response that you're in the system. As soon as they have been looked at to see do they move to the next stage, they get an automatic response. But we do try to also do the personal outreach because that's what's important to people.
I think it raised a question in my mind, aside from the fact that we've seen this in the past, where I know that especially with police officer positions, that the process was taking longer than it was in other jurisdictions, and we ended up losing good people to other jurisdictions because of that. But recently, I know there was someone who applied for an internship at the beginning of the summer and still hasn't heard back yet on.
Please let me know about that offline because I'll follow up on that. I don't want a situation like that. I do know with police, we are being very rigorous about moving our police candidates and process into a very kind of
Right, we don't wanna-
sophisticated, professional
We don't
way.
want to usurp the process, but we also don't want to lose good people because it
Yeah.
takes us.
No, we're being very careful about it, but please let me follow up with the item that you mentioned.
All right, thank you very much.
All right. We'll now move on to our work session, which is a major projects update.
So in your blue folder, I've just got a kind of four-page chart to help me walk through this. I will say that as I try to prepare something that could be handed out or put up on the screen, every single moment that seemed different information came forward. And as you'll see, I even received new information this evening at about 6 p.m. about library stuff. So it's always a work in progress. That is why we do have the project pages on the website. And I know some of them were not updated recently, but we've now updated a number of them. So I think we're, certainly with any of these major projects, those sites have been recently updated. I'm going to go through these. I've put them in the order that's in the budget because we had in the budget document, we had the council priorities and identified what projects kind of went to what priorities. And I think that was a way to group them. Some of these I'll go through very quickly. Resident survey is in preparation. We did have a problem with the most recent focus group. And so we will need to get that handled again before we can actually go out for surveying. And we're not sure what happened that would cause that one focus group for the people to kind of decline to participate, but we're hoping to have that redressed. Coming up in October, there will be quite a lot of discussion about the housing component of the Draft Housing and Economic Development Strategic Plan. That's something that we're anxious to talk about. I know that Council's very anxious to talk about. I think we have 3 different dates in October that will be addressing this. And we're hoping that then over the winter, we'll be moving closer to actually kind of adopting sections and really putting into place the implementation steps. I will say that in addition to what we've got, I've also been listening to a number of housing webinars with some more information that have been very intriguing lately with some good suggestions. And so I'm looking forward to having those discussions with you. MCPS is doing, obviously, their site selection process for elementary schools. We're concerned about it, so we monitor it. We have been having discussions about where there might be a site in Tacoma Park. Yes, sir.
With the John Evans Andrews now back on the market, is that potentially one of those?
It's a small site. So that's part of the reason MCPS did not rank it higher than before, but yes, I think it's still, at this point, we have to be very creative. We've got such overcrowded schools right now that things have to be dealt with. On the ADA sidewalk retrofit, we put very little money into the ADA sidewalk retrofit this year in the budget. $109,000 goes to be part of the Flower Avenue project, and $200,000 was to be for sidewalks along state highways. The area in Philadelphia is probably the highest priority, but with the WSSC work, we're waiting for that WSSC work to wrap up before we get into that.
Do you have a sense for how long a stretch 200,000 could
Do you have a
cover?
We're at the beginning of the process, so there may be a little bit of difference at the beginning. Oh, it's,
We have gotten an understanding from State Highway about the expectation for the process, but we haven't put shovels in the ground yet, so that
Yeah.
may change. They may require inspections, they may require testing that we don't normally do with our citywide projects, so it may add to the cost. But I would say, you know, a block is, what's a block in the city? They're all different sizes. But I would think that you can assume about 100,000 a block for state highway work, and that's both sides, not a single side. So should be able to cover an average 2 blocks.
it's always amazing to me how much infrastructure costs. So we argue about $25,000 for a program, but then, you know,
Yeah.
sidewalks and things cost a lot. One of the big projects that had been delayed, it's now again kind of underway, is the Public Land and Open Space Management Plan process. And the staff in HCD is working on that. They're going through and updating data that they had. They've also been identifying some community engagement tools, because part of this is going to be really important to go out into the community and talk about. It's a fairly large subject area, so it's how do we deal with anything in the right-of-way? How do we deal with open space areas, public lands, and how do we identify kind of what we've got and then what we need? And as Councilwoman Searcy mentioned earlier, there's, you know, it's not evenly divided across the city about what kind of resources there are. But there's also some really cool stuff that we can think about. And one of the things that I'm more and more convinced about is that in some of the newer areas of the city, some of the streets are wider. If you've got wider streets, maybe you can use some of that width for other purposes other than just vehicles. And so even in areas where we may not have parkland, we may have other ways to make it have more trees, or make it more, put some more nature into some places that simply by taking away some pavement. And so we've got lots to work on, lots to do with that. But I think that, to me, this is one of those areas where we have real opportunity to kind of change the vision of Tacoma Park, what Tacoma Park looks like. It's also a real opportunity to address one of my pet concerns right now, which has to do with flooding. And what do we do with climate change in Tacoma Park, which is making significant differences in our livability. And as we're looking at these public lands and open space, how we deal with stormwater and those kinds of things are at a higher level than we've ever had to deal with them. I know there's comments on this, so happy to answer your question.
So, I appreciate the effort thus far. I think I'm still a little confused on what are the ultimate goals of the plan. Are they the same as what was communicated back in 2015, or has that vision changed? We're talking about community engagement tools, but what is it about? Like, what are we trying to engage the community around?
Right. I can't even answer that, because I think we have to come back to you and talk about it some more. When we had a lot of staff changes in HCD, things kind of got put down, put back a little bit. And I think some of the challenges are different even since that time. So I'm looking forward to having that discussion with you all about kind of what that goal should be, as well as on the website. And if you look under the project link, there's a lot of good information in there, but it may need to change some.
Yep.
As to goals and
Right.
what your desires are for the project.
Yep. I would definitely encourage, particularly for those projects that for budgetary reasons or staffing constraints have been carried in the budget for a while, haven't had movement, perhaps that the first step is revisiting what was already done and then coming back to the council to let us know whether or not the goals that were previously approved for that project is where we want to continue to focus. Because I'm going to be frank, right now I'm confused. I don't know what we're doing. I don't know if we're doing what we said we were going to do in 2015. Given limited staff, I'd rather folks not focus right now on community engagement until we know exactly what we're trying to engage the community around. So I think it would be helpful to take a more re-look at what we've done and then come up with an action plan in terms of next steps.
I think that sounds fine. I certainly, I need a fresh look at it myself.
Me too. Thank you.
In the same vein, although it's a more limited study, it has to do with the parking study. It also kind of got put on the back burner. It was a more limited project, and that does need, again, to go have some more community discussion. That's something that I think will come back later, sometime next year, as opposed to as soon as we will have discussions with the Public Land and Open Space Management Plan. Again, we had collected a lot of data for that, so making sure that we've got that data up to date, seeing if there's any new information that we need is important.
Can I just say something about the Public Land and Open Space Plan? Having been involved in it when it 3-4 years ago, I completely agree. A fresh look at the goals by the council and maybe the Environment Committee and would be really useful before going too much further.
Okay.
Sorry, I was a little confused. Was your last report related to the parking study?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's what I thought. Can you just clarify, because I know, if I remember right, the surveys that went out to people were done maybe a year and a half ago or so?
It's probably 2 years,
So,
year and a half.
Will that data will it correspond with any additional data that is gathered? It seems like you could have a mismatch between what people were saying then and whatever additional data is collected.
I'm not sure. I think you're right. I think we have to look at that really carefully.
Okay.
People seem to have a different perspective than they did even a little bit ago. I mean, they were really nervous. Folks were really nervous. What will happen when busboys and poets come in? Nobody talks about it anymore. But we put in a parklet, and there was some discussion.
Well, I also think related to the junction, there's a lot of concern, because I hear a lot as that area is building up and there's new businesses like Soul Food coming in. I hear a lot of concern from people about parking, and I think we need to look at that. But I also think that information could be really useful as we look at traffic flow, because if there are cars or a lot of cars, that can slow traffic down, or if there aren't cars parked, that can speed people up, and you can kind of have a traffic jam or not a traffic jam based on whether or not there is parking there. So I think that will be very important, and I hope we can get to that soon.
The other part of the parking study also was just for the various kind of the little area parking permits process, and trying, frankly, probably move away from that to some extent, or have a different kind of system for that, was part of what was being looked at. And that's one area where I don't know that there's been much change in how people feel. I think we got pretty good data about that. So that may be something that we don't have to spend a lot more time on, and can bring some of those recommendations to you as we look with a fresh eye at the other information.
Thank you.
Councilmember Smith?
Regarding the Public Land and Open Space Management Plan, how do the areas that are in the county but they're bordering us, like Sligo Creek, how do we maintain information on what's going on in those areas, and how is that pushed up to council? And the reason why I ask that is residents always ask about the park and Sligo Creek Parkway between Houston and Kennebec. That's not our park. But to get any answers, it goes through to park and planning.
Right.
And it's tough to continue to make that a priority from my position when there are all these other priorities that are also going on in the ward. So how does staff look at county parks or open space or whatever? And another example is the green space on Maple and Sligo Creek Parkway.
Right.
That people always ask, can I use this?
Right.
What's the process to use this? Can I
Right.
cook out there? How do we manage that, so to speak?
Well, we don't manage it. We send it to Park and Planning, but it is a frustrating thing often because it feels like it's our park. And people, enjoy parks. It's a public park.
So we don't follow up. When you say we send it to Park and Planning?
We don't, what do you mean we don't follow up? We have communications with them, but I will tell you, they have turnover there too. And so it's trying to find the right person for what it is they need. Certainly, it's not that hard for someone to rent a park.
Right.
And there's a process for that. But other than just our communications, certainly both our Public Works Director and our HCD staff are in frequent conversations with park management, about issues, but it's just talking.
Right. So do city
I'm
staff,
sorry, I don't have a good answer, I think.
do they have regular meetings with Park and Planning on
We
these
don't,
issues?
for park stuff, I don't think we have it that much. No, it's more related to if there's a problem or if we're working on a project.
Okay, all right, thank you.
No, and I will just say, even though Councilmember Hucker just lost Julio Soron, who is his constituent service person, he did do an excellent job helping residents connect with parks folks, and I hope whoever takes his place in Councilmember Hucker's office lives up to Julio's.
Quick question about the parking study.
Yes.
So, I'm looking at the website now, and there's a lot of stuff here. So what is the end game? I'm just trying to make sure we're not studying something to death and that,
We haven't spent a lot of time on it for a long time.
Okay.
So I think there's a number of things, as I mentioned, some of it is close to ready to go to you. We did a lot of work beforehand, but it has been a bit, so we may have some different kind of views on some of those, certainly what residents might want to see.
And I also just want to note that it makes sense that back when this was started, the focus was wards 1, 2, and 3. But given the impact of the Purple Line and what folks in Montgomery County are doing in terms of zone parking and the like, that might actually change the landscape of what might be something that would need to be considered under a study like this. So is that something that you all are considering as well, or no?
Oh, yeah.
So if I can just clarify, it's a parking management study. And so the management part is really important to put out there. We're not just interested for curiosity's sake of how people use parking. We're interested in how the city uses publicly owned space and how we manage that in ways, recognizing that there may be high demand in certain areas at certain times, and what the ideal or optimal situation looks like to allow that to be used well.
So, there's meters and there's parking permit areas and a variety of those kinds of tools, but there may be something that's, more appropriate that we don't use, or there may be something that's more appropriate in one area than another. Okay.
So the idea is to come back with policies around.
Changing some of the ordinance requirements because sometimes some of our stuff in the ordinance is too specific about parking management. Yeah.
Okay. And then in terms of, so like online is showing that the target completion date is 2019. So is that still the plan? Like, are we
Yeah, we just moved it to that point because it was clear that we needed to work on this other stuff first. We're working on this, but it comes after some of the other work that's on our plate.
Okay. Thank you.
Got a couple items, new sidewalks. I know somebody up here is very happy about a new sidewalk. So work on Larch Avenue is completed. Lincoln Avenue has their kickoff meeting September 27th. Construction's intended to start around October 1st. Glenside Avenue is in the process of the stormwater plan development, and I know, Councilmember Searcy, you're up to speed on that.
Yep.
Yeah.
So do we, I'm looking at Daryl, have you heard anything about when we may kind of be ready to re-engage residents around the stormwater design?
We exchanged some emails with our design team, actually just, I think it was either yesterday or today, so they're working on it.
Okay.
I can, when I get back to the office, can send you their calendar schedule, because they sent us a sort of a timeline for when they think they'll have, things done. And then we could schedule a meeting to discuss the stormwater aspects. I know we've, in addition to that, have Park and Planning's planned meeting on the sort of specific Jackson Avenue situation, but also their overall MS4 and
Right.
stormwater work. So I can't remember if a date's been set for
Yeah,
that.
well, I set the date, but we haven't sent
It's the
anything
six-
out because we wanted to check on the design.
Right,
So,
right.
yeah, you could just,
So we won't have specific things to look at that meeting. We can just talk about it in general and can mention the likely areas where it'll be and the likely types of facilities and features we'll have.
okay.
Yeah.
So it's okay for me to go ahead and
Yep.
move it? Okay, thank you.
We also do street repaving. We're close to completing Crescent and Holt. Then we'll do Linden Alley and Circle, and then Winding Hill Way. On the sidewalks and the street repaving online, we've updated the street lists and sidewalk lists so people can follow along where we are on that.
And Winding Hill Way, will that be done before the end of the year?
Yes.
I just wanted to say that there was some nice flexibility around a couple of spots on Crescent. I know it's a real pain to get those kinds of things and not easy to do, and I think it worked out well, so thank you for that.
Sure. Yeah, one of the things that, although we have engineering standards we have to meet, we're a lot more flexible than bigger communities, so that's nice. Can't always do it, but we can sometimes. The cultural plan is scheduled for November 28th council meeting. At that point, it'll give us direction on budgeting and that kind of thing to a small extent and their work program. I didn't put a lot under racial equity, but certainly we've got workshops scheduled and for our committee members and others. And I know the council's been working on this right along. Under the policy of financially sustainable government, our sustainable investment and banking policy is underway, but it's been delayed. We're going to need to keep working on that. We're seeing if we can get some meetings with the consultant who had volunteered some time again, so that was something that we had scheduled at one point and then had to postpone. So we're going to try to get those meetings set back up again.
So just so I understand, so the where we are now is rescheduling meetings that we were gonna have at one, okay.
That's right.
Yeah, so
we're-
nothing slipped back or new issues, we're just picking
Yeah,
it
it's
up
not
where
new
we were.
issues, it's just,
Okay.
we had other things on the plate.
Yeah, just checking it.
Yeah. We did modify our approved budget document from previous years to the categories and criteria that are needed for a GFOA award. We don't know if we will get it. It's a big stretch, so we might not get it this first year. Even on our comprehensive annual financial report, when we get it each year, there's always extra comments. Well, next time you could try, showing something this way or whatever. So we anticipate getting those kind of comments on the budget document and identifying some improvements for us for the future years. The general goal of these is to make them understandable to the regular person. So how transparent are we in our budget document? And that's what, and we hope we get the award, but I don't know.
Great. Just on that note, I'd like to say that I had a meeting with a resident who's very interested in budget issues, and he had a copy of Greenbelt's budget.
Yes.
That was really,
It's very big.
Yeah.
And it costs a lot.
oh, Greenbelt does it?
Their budgeting does, their
Oh, okay.
budget document. But we use it. We certainly look at it. We've looked at Greenbelt's and Rockville's and a number of other
Okay.
municipalities to see
'Cause
what's.
I always think of Greenbelt as comparable to us. I wasn't comparing us to Rockville.
I know,
Yeah.
but they have traditionally put a lot more money into their budget document.
Okay, that's good to
So,
know.
so partly it's, how much money do you spend on something? But they have lots of pictures, and so that ends up actually communicating a lot. It is attractive in that way. We did, the council adopted a financial policy on reserves. There are other financial policies that we will be bringing back to you over the times to have updated, but that one was, I think, the big one, and I appreciate that. Under environmentally sustainable community, we're doing a lot on sustainability efforts. The Renewable Energy Challenge was going to end in September, but it's going to be extended to December 31st. The goal is to try to get.
all the notices that said that.
Hurry up.
The last couple of days.
I know, but we're trying to get some notices together, let people know that we're going to extend it. I just got that message this afternoon. And we are continuing to work with multifamily properties to make them more sustainable.
How's that effort?
We'll be getting a report on that very shortly. Is that next week? Yep. October 3rd, yeah. I think that's one of the things that's been particularly unique about Tacoma Park is that we've put a lot of effort on the multifamily outreach, which a lot of communities don't do. And that's an important area that otherwise gets overlooked. So we'll get that report. LED conversion, I think you all know a lot about where we stand on that. We are hoping that the second test of light fixtures will occur next week. We'll let you know when that can be done, and then hope to have a walkthrough with Pepco. Hopefully consideration by council soon after that. Flower Avenue Green Street, it's underway. Construction won't start until the spring. We have apparently a copy of the notice that tells the final approver to sign it at SHA, but they've not actually signed it at SHA. It's been weeks and weeks sitting there saying, you have everything's cleared to sign, and haven't signed it. Once they do, I will sign the contract to ENR Services that's had everything approved. After that, they'll go through several months of materials approval. Every bolt type and everything else has to be approved as to the correct kind. And then we're looking to February for a pre-construction meeting with the community as well as with the contractor, obviously, with construction to begin in the spring. So it's everything but that final T crossed is ready to go. We're looking forward to that project. And if anybody knows somebody to get them to cross the T,
Where
that
have
would be really nice.
Where have I heard this before? I think
Yeah,
I
I
heard this
know.
on the Gateway Project, which you don't have on the list because it's almost done.
It's later.
Oh, is it? Oh,
Yeah,
darn.
no, it's,
Never mind.
so one of the things that is really weird is that what I consider big projects, that would just pop right up at the top, but I was trying to follow the format of the policies, so some of the big ones are near the end.
Okay, never mind.
But it is almost done.
City Man, one thing I would suggest is actually flagging those projects that you consider to be big projects.
Yeah.
I think that would really help the council to
Okay.
prioritize, because what immediately came to mind to me is looking at, there's a lot of work here, and that's awesome, but we have a limited number of staff. And so if there are certain projects that have been on hold for a while and no one's really beaten down the door other than the council, and it's not a priority, then maybe we could push some
So-
of these things off.
Well, you bring an important point. I'm trying to describe when we're behind on something in that second column. And part of the reason I'm doing this presentation is to let everyone know that we have a lot on our plate. We really are stretched. And so, and I always like to do this, but then I started hearing people coming up with other ideas of projects, and I'm like, no, please no. Because we do need to figure out how they fit in. But I appreciate your comment about kind of which ones really take a lot of staff time and which ones, maybe need to be rethought as to timing.
Actually, with that, I was going to save this till later, but since Councilwoman Searcy brought it up, and I know this will take some work, but I'd actually like to see 2 other columns on this at some point. One is budget numbers that we have. I know you've done it for some things. And then figuring out, and this will take some work, staff time. Allocation.
Just kind of a staff.
Just a general, like how, either, and again, I leave that up to you and the staff to figure out the best metric and how to do it. Is it hours? Is it FTEs? Is it what? And I know some of this is seasonal and it ebbs and flows. So maybe you do it in chunks of times or whatever. But I think it would be, I want to say I think this is awesome, having this chart and looking at all the work here. And adding some columns on budget numbers and staff time in the future, I think will also help us as we do go into budget. I know a number of my colleagues, Councilwoman Kostick and others, have talked about different ways of seeing the budget, and I think this would be really helpful.
I did have a budget column on here, and then I took it off because I didn't have all the numbers. But we'll be getting our first quarter financials very soon, and I think I may be able to do that.
And I would add another column, if you can, that goes to Councilwoman Searcy's, is just goals for the project. I think having just, like you have comments.
I can, and so I probably do need to say that better. I also don't want to too much replace what's on our project website. So, so a brief description of the goals in a better way. Okay.
Yeah. But that's like a tertiary to
So-
budget numbers and staff time.
So when we did the Affordable Housing and Economic Development Strategy, when we talked about it the first time, I think it was the second night, somebody went through and just as a matter of 3 categories, this is expensive, but not time consuming. Even at that level would be very, very useful.
Yeah, I would do it in almost the categories because it's really hard to.
That would
tell
be
anything else.
great.
Okay.
One other thing, and this was done before but could be updated, for the big physical projects as opposed to initiatives and so on, the calendar, the master calendar concept. And I know there's big staff work on that too, but I think it's helpful for us to be able to see which things could kind of end up happening at more or less the same time or might need to be held up when we have control over them too.
Right.
So I think that's useful too.
Are there more questions right now? Or? Okay.
I have one, but
Okay, I stopped.
sorry, if I can just add, it also seems to me that it would be useful, not as a project page, but just during this discussion, if an additional column or section could be added where you could give a context of other work that staff are doing that might not be included here, and obviously you can't describe all of that, but I think if a particular department, for example, Public Works has all of a sudden been inundated with flooding issues and stormwater management and all of those sorts of things, that if that wasn't something that was anticipated here, or there have been a lot of resident requests related to something, or there's been a lot of time taken up on those things, I think it would be helpful to see that.
Right. I may not be able to do that as a column, but I did think about it in terms of comments, and some of those aren't written down here.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I think I said column. What I meant was a row. An additional row at the end.
But I think that those things are really tough because they sometimes are time specific. In general, I will say that for construction projects, the rain has been a real pain. It's slowed down a lot. We do have a number of flooding concerns. One of the impacts that we have on staff is so many people expanding their homes, so tree permits and those kinds of things just skyrocketing. So I appreciate that. I'm not sure if I'll give it some thought and talk to staff about a good way to present
I
of those other
think it can
things.
even be what you just said there. Just giving us that context, I think, is useful to understand what else they're doing and some of the limitations.
Right. And in that same vein, part of anytime you have people trying to expand their homes, they have to get permit letters out of HCD. And so HCD ends up having a lot of that kind of interconnectedness with the reviewing agencies as well. So I'll see if I can find some way to incorporate that. Let's see, I'm trying to figure out where I am now. I did that, and I did Flower Avenue. Stormwater management fee structure, the study that is underway, it's been moving slowly, and we will have information before it's time for budget discussion. So that's to try to find, to see if the ERU is the right amount, or if there's some alternative, a couple options for that. We'll be coming back to you.
On the stormwater study, if there's an interim step before the financial analysis about the ERUs and if there's just a sense of the stormwater volumes and locations generally, that interim step would be useful.
I'm not sure that that's exactly what we'll be getting, but it will be useful to see, I think, how impermeable surface may have changed over time, and if our assumptions on that have been accurate. Because it was a long time ago that we had the study that gave our base system. In increased tree canopy, it's LiDAR, is that how you say it? LiDAR data has been collected. It's in the quality control phase with Montgomery County. Our consultant will then prepare the Tacoma Park specific information for consideration. And so that'll then be coming back to you. I know the council committee is looking at some of that already. But once that information comes, it'll be nice to be able to share it for a variety of purposes. It'll be divided not only by Tacoma Park as a whole, but by ward and by size or kind of age of trees. So I think that could be very useful in planning where there are areas that have gaps or may have trouble in the future.
I also think that there's a couple of places where the results actually feed into other efforts, right? So, and that might actually be helpful in thinking about priorities and timing of projects. So the LiDAR data could potentially help inform, things like open space management and where we should really invest. So I think it's important for there to be kind of that cross-pollination and thinking about how to tackle the task. Again, keeping in mind everyone's overwhelmed, but if the LiDAR data can help inform the open space management plan, then we should hold off folks working on that just yet and get the LiDAR data to use it, So I think there's a couple of places where that might make sense to do, and this just immediately came to mind for me.
Okay. Engaged, responsive, and service-oriented government. We're working on police community relations, and I think, the chief is evaluating the department. Under MOUs with area police agencies, I just wanted to mention, and I've changed it to underway to under review, because some of the conversations that the chief has been having with other agencies have made him wonder if it's exactly oriented the right way. So I think he'll be coming back to me and then to you with some recommendations related to that. So I just wanted to give you that heads up. A lot of conversations with Prince George's County in particular that made us think that maybe a slightly different approach might make more sense. Obviously, the goal is to work well with our surrounding jurisdictions in mutual aid and police efforts. Communications improvements, we've done a lot this past year. One of the requests was that we expand information in the newsletter in different languages, and we're working on that. Actually, I was going to ask Deputy City Manager, do we have any idea of when we might start that? With the other languages, because I know that, Yeah, well, I'll have to find that out. That's one of the things we had set aside some space for, but I'm not sure which issue it's going to start in. One area where we have a really tough time is having SHA and utilities communicate with us, let us know where things are, make sure our residents know what's going on. I think the quarterly meetings with SHA have helped. Some of the big projects that have been ongoing, when we have the people in town a lot, you get to know them for a while. But then when it's the next project, it might be different cast of characters. And so it's a frustrating area.
I'd love to just jump in on that for a minute. On the utilities, generally, it's a challenging thing, and the contractors are involved also. With respect to the WSSC project on Philadelphia Avenue, my pretty clear recollection was what they said was they'd be working their way along in 150 to 200 foot sections, and that when that happened, that side of the street would be closed off and the rest of the street wouldn't. So today, just in Tacoma Park, there are 3 separate sections of that on Philadelphia Avenue. And the way the flagging was working, when you're in the stop as opposed to slow to go through, 2 or 3 light changes would occur and you'd just be stuck there. And I say you, but I mean me, because I was doing it. But if there's some reason they've had to change to do more, so I did send a note to the people who've been pretty responsive to me in the past, but there's something different going on there now. And honestly, you couldn't get through that section in less than like 15 minutes. And when you got through one, then there was the next one. And there were multiple switches of the lights while you waited, people coming in the other direction. And the flag guys were throwing up their shoulders and, sorry, there's nothing I can do, because the other guy didn't. So they've changed what they told us they were going to do. So I would appreciate if we could look into that.
And I'll just add that I am encouraging the workshops committee of the CPC to have a roundtable with the utilities once again at the summer conference.
Good.
I also want to throw in a positive, and I want to thank Ms. Braithwaite for all of her help in coordinating with the contractor along Eastern Avenue, Pepco's contractor. There have been a couple of issues there, and you've been a huge help with the residents there, so thank you.
One of the items is to review and improve the tree ordinance, and I know council members have been identifying kind of the information that they've heard from their constituents that seem to be areas that they'd like to see addressed. I think there's quite a bit to go forward on this. I think just the cautionary note is that the tree ordinance is really complex, and some of the concerns that we've heard also have to do more with process and not the ordinance. And for process reasons, there's things that you don't necessarily think about make a difference. For example, there was a long delay in changing the processing that we do with credit cards with our financial system, partly because of the Nuclear Free Committee and their concern about SunTrust. And finally, I said, look, we have to get this credit card process going. And if we have to change everything later in terms of an entity, we have to do it later. But, we were trying to be conscientious of this other process, so that we were holding. Once we got switched over with the credit card item, we realized that the Tyler financial system didn't have a component really ready to go in the software. And so some of the requests about doing some things online aren't ready to go yet. And, so these are things that may not have anything to do with the text of the tree ordinance, but are part of the aggravation that somebody may feel. So as we go through this, we'll have to be really careful about identifying what are ordinance issues and what are other kind of issues, and look forward to all of those different discussions. It's not a real simple thing. So I do just kind of want to give you guys the heads up that this is not a fast project. So the tree ordinance just tends to be a tough one. And so recognizing that will take some time. One thing that we've not worked on is, but we've talked about the need for working on, is improving the process requesting sidewalks and traffic calming. And I know that there's been some discussions that perhaps in the coming year, we could really look at how we deal with our whole issue about traffic calming and those projects. So I'm just recording it here, but we've not spent as staff any significant time working on it.
Thank you for including that update. And that's something I really want to be involved in, and I know that you know that. So I'm looking forward to having discussions about that moving forward.
Good.
And there will be a focus on the apartment buildings.
Yeah, I think that's a huge part of it. That's a huge part of it, because it just is not, the way our system works, just doesn't work well in an area with apartment buildings.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Improving a process for dealing with conflicts along residential and commercial boundaries. At this point, it's kind of we've been doing this on a case-by-case basis, not really systematically. But we've also received fewer complaints lately, knock on bamboo. And I was kind of wondering about that as we were thinking about it. Maybe having the option of the noise ordinance has helped. Maybe just more attention from our neighborhood services team has helped. I'm not sure what the reasoning is, but I think we just have to keep monitoring this. And if you see an issue, we'll see how we can address it. It's also, part of what we look at when we look at the open space areas and all kinds of things, how do you have buffers? So one of the things that was on our schedule was to renovate the police department, and so we're getting the detailed drawings done. And it kind of depends on the status of the library project. The goal was to kind of work on the library project first, do one part of the police work in the library, and then complete the police work. Depending on the status of the library project, which I'll go to in a little bit, we may end up doing the police department first. This is one where we just have to go back and forth on and see how the information comes in from the two different projects.
Does that include the filling in of the?
Yeah, that would be the first part of the police part.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
We do IT work, behind the scenes, switches and next generation firewall. Work on the switches is underway, and then we'll work on the next gen firewall improvements. I just want to put in a plug for our head of our IT unit, who has just been phenomenal at identifying issues, risks that we should not be taking, and identifying the ways to make it a robust system that also is easy to work with. And we've been saving money often in the solutions that he comes up with. So just really thrilled with that.
And he'll be putting on, for staff, security training. I personally was almost the victim of what's called a spear phishing attack yesterday.
Yeah.
Where I was communicating in real time to a person who sent me an invoice to process to wire money.
For the conference that we were working with.
And following up with questions, knowing about our relationship with each other.
And it looked like it was from the
it came
colleague.
from his email address and everything. And so I'm very vigilant about those things, and I almost got. So it's something that we need to do internally to safeguard ourselves and our coffers.
I think that would be important for city council to know as well, because mayor in another city I won't name, the same thing happened recently. So we should also
It was
extend that to the city council.
it was surprising. Jason showed me the request and the back and forth, and you would think you were with a legitimate vendor who knew you very well. It was just very scary. Just a note on planning for the change date of city elections for 2020, that right now activity is on hold until after the November elections, because obviously Montgomery County Board of Elections is kind of busy. Yep. Under community development for an improved and equitable quality of life, The mayor mentioned that SHA does intend on looking at Tacoma Junction intersection improvements, and we don't know the timing exactly or whatever, but was very pleased to see that letter come in that they're actually moving forward on a study, and that would have a lot of community input, it sounds like. Our Tacoma Junction Development Project is beginning the county review process. The NDC is preparing information for submittal still. There's a lot of details that they're going back and forth with the planning staff to get right before they actually do the formal submittal.
And am I correct that before they submit formally, there will be a pre-submittal meeting?
Right, there's a
And so
requirement.
that'll be announced and
That's
people will
right.
hear it at the time that comes.
That's right, oh yeah,
gets
we have to do the
scheduled. Okay.
advertising and everything.
Thank you.
Yeah. In kind of thinking about the impact of the Purple Line on our community and preparing for that, construction hasn't directly affected Tacoma Park yet. I appreciate that Councilwoman Searcy and staff have been very actively engaged in the various kind of partner groups and organizations. But I think, we're going to have much more work as it goes forward. I need to find out more about the interesting meeting it sounded like you had yesterday or the day before.
Yeah, so I would say that this statement is not exactly correct.
Okay.
Although they have not broken ground, you do occasionally see the utility work that is
That's right.
happening
Oh,
where
yeah.
they're shutting down
That's
certain
right.
lanes in the area. And particularly, the conversation today was around design and having the contractors go through the process of approval of signs to help businesses along the route identify, entrances. So there is a lot of there's starting to be more work that is happening in terms of preparation. And given the fact that you are working with certain contractor groups and they would need time to clear whatever design you have and then order whatever signage you want and then get it in and get it installed, you really don't want to wait until they're actually breaking open ground before you start that process of ordering.
Right.
So yes, happy to chat more.
Good.
But I do think that there needs to be a little bit more of a strategy around engagement, lobbying, funding, and working with our Prince George's colleagues.
Right.
So I would say it's not just about what the state is doing in the train, but actually how we can actually leverage something like the Purple Line to make some inroads in an area that we've struggled with for some time.
I meant to say all that because I agree with that. I will say, I live a half a block from the tunnel, and a block from the entrance to Giant. And one of the things that has been very interesting is that the construction folks I've found to be remarkably courteous, clean, not loud. They follow the hour requirements, all those kinds of things. The one area where there's a problem has to do with the pedestrian entrance to Giant from Flower Avenue. And and this has gotten heavy county council review and all kinds of things. And it has to do with the fact that no one seems to be in charge of the segment of property that is the entrance area where they've set up some bollards for people to walk along the pathway. And so it's REIT says it's, maybe Giant should do it, and Giant says it's REIT, and somebody else says it should be Purple Line Partners because they're doing something else. And so it's very frustrating, especially if you're handicapped to be able to get there. So watching that, how they're doing the signage, how they're following the things, in most ways, I'm very pleased to see that they have been attentive to the community concerns and trying to work with the businesses. But there's going to be these kinds of problems, and it's helpful to see that, just from across the street from me, what that entails. And so it'll keep us busy.
It'll be fun.
We've got a couple properties that, you know, we watch that are vacant, or almost vacant. The J&A property again, the Washington McLaughlin School property that's partially occupied. We try to facilitate for the best use. I know, Councilmember Costick, you're looking at having a community meeting related to J&A property. And certainly on Dorothy's Woods, we took action recently and tonight on Dorothy's Woods to protect it. I noticed in the budget and in the Dorothy's Woods isn't specifically mentioned. It just says Washington McLaughlin in the thing. So it just was kind of interesting. I just added that in because it's something that people kind of recognize and know.
Thought we were done. I thought we were done.
What?
We thought we were done.
Yeah, I know.
That's why.
Oh,
Sorry.
turn the
No,
page.
I
Just-
think when we were doing
Oh,
it.
I know. When we thought it.
Right,
Well, that's
that's
right. I'm sorry. You're right. That's
You're
what
right.
it was.
We didn't think it was gonna come back.
Yes.
We thought we were done.
Okay.
That's why we didn't mention it.
You're
I-
right.
I also have a question about the J&A property. What sort of advocacy does the staff anticipate doing, or could it do? And are there things that we can be discussing regarding that?
You know, advocacy is kind of a funny word on this. So I think the main thing is that as a built community where there's a vacant place that's bigger than this, we try to think about how does it fit into the puzzle of getting us to meet our goals? And is there a way, you know, and we hear from people, well, I'm thinking about this kind of activity, and then we may have a number of sites that we might want to steer them to something that's more appropriate site for that kind of activity. So that's kind of the idea of the advocacy. The other part has to do with, certainly for the hospital site, which is on here, you know, what kind of lobbying can we do with the county to help come to the table on some of these projects, to help make something happen. So it's not necessarily saying that we know the answer for a site, but it's keeping it as part of the discussion and talking with people about what they want to see, what they don't want to see, what might work, you know, it's more that keeping it as a lively discussion item.
Okay, yeah, and maybe after we've had our meeting or during our meeting, we can share some more information about what residents are hoping
And
for
that'd be
there,
very
and that
great.
can
That would
inform
be very
that.
helpful,
Mhm.
right?
Okay.
Has city staff ever done an analysis to see if or how the city could buy that property?
I don't know if we did a formal analysis. We certainly, first of all, we always know we don't have money. But
Yes, of
we
course.
always think about, is there something that makes sense? Again, it might be part of a big project that makes some sense. One of the things that in my many webinars that I've been listening to lately, if we had a little bit more money, I would jump on this, really is in the idea of land banking, in that sometimes it's better for a community to buy a parcel, even if they don't have an actual use for it yet, knowing that they need things for affordable housing and other kinds of things. And so, you know, if there were something that it was a reasonable price, you know, and doable, that's one thing. But I don't think we're there yet. I think we need a lot of discussion about how we go forward on the strategic plan and priorities from that.
So there hasn't been any conversations with the state delegation, or about if there potentially could be some money?
We always ask for money from our delegations.
Yeah, but for this project.
But no, I don't think so, because I think we would need a very specific ask since it's not our property.
And the reason I bring it up, I went to this seminar that was hosted by the state's GSA, and you know they were encouraging municipalities, primarily Prince George's, to make asks, you know, so that they could buy properties and fix them up or whatever. And you know, we've already seen one potential buyer fall by the wayside. You know, it might be something that we could consider.
Right.
I will say, on the last few years, when we've provided testimony at, before Annapolis, when they have the Montgomery County
The joint
delegation.
hearing, yeah.
We have brought up J&A, the hospital site, and in continuing conversations with the delegation and our county council, and actually school board members,
Mhm.
reminding them that there are these properties and
Right.
projects that could happen. So I think you're right in taking that a step further, but I think keeping that up
Mhm.
is also important.
So this piggybacks a lot on the housing and economic strategic plan, but, and kind of in the same vein as my colleagues, I heard that we get people coming to us asking, or we go to our, the state and, our stakeholders, but to what extent are we actually trying to market, and this kind of comes in line with New Hampshire Avenue, how are we as a city marketing our commercial property to perhaps other developers or entities that may be doing or engaging in projects that we would like to have here? So how are we, instead of being reactive to requests, how are we being proactive to try to solicit private nonprofits here?
If we hear of something, we try to be proactive about pursuing that. But, that's part of the reason we're trying to get an economic development manager. It's why we're going through the economic development strategic plan, because it's sometimes worse if you're just scattershot approach. You need to have a whole system in mind. And what is your selling hook on that? What is the point? We do developer tours at times. We have been working with folks along New Hampshire Avenue, and helping them apply for grants, working with property owners. But in terms of a real proactive approach, we need staff.
Okay.
And so hopefully when we get somebody on board, that will be, a real big part of their job. Right. I'd like to talk a minute about the library. So we've been doing a floodplain study around the library, and engineers have done a lot of work, sent it into the county. It's a fairly complex process to review, and it's particularly what we did was we sent in the floodplain study without real detailed designs of what we wanted to do, because we wanted to get the base floodplain study correct first. And so that surprised the county, because often, somebody gives everything at once, and we didn't. The information's come back from the county. There's some tweaks that need to be done to the report, but it's just the minor tweaks before it's kind of approved or, accepted by the county. At 6 o'clock today, I saw a summary of the implications, and I think there's a little scary implications about the floodplain study. Partly, the flood wall that we have is not high enough. Partly, this is times have changed. I mean, we really are dealing with flooding as a problem, and so it may be that there may be a fairly simple way to deal with an expansion that kind of raises, you kind of go up and then down a little bit to get into a door or do some things. But we're going to be having a meeting to see what the implications are for our plans for the library. But I think it also it really affects this whole property. So we might not be able to be doing stuff in the police department right away. We really may need to think differently about this whole property. And so we'll be setting up a meeting of staff and the engineers and the architect to look through what this means, and then we'll have to, kind of come back with some recommendations about how to move forward. We had talked about this before, and there was some creative answers that could work. Given what I saw today, I'm not sure that those are still valid. We'll need to go through and look at them. But I also think, we're in a different world, and we have to think differently about how we build in Tacoma Park and how we retrofit. And anything from giving advice to people that in their basements don't use drywall to real coordinated impacts on how water will work and go through our community is something that we're going to need to focus on. And so we'll look and see what we can do related to the library. That may be a doable project, but it does, I think, have a lot of implications about how we need to look at all of our properties and see what we need to do to make them resilient for the future. Climate change it's not going to get easier here. So how are we going to adapt? And it's going to be costly. It's infrastructure that we're going to have to deal with. My guess is it'll be a couple weeks before we'll have a better sense of what the implications are from the letter that we got today. And I'll bring that information back to you. So that's a bummer. But it's also kind of what, I mean, seeing the geyser on the walkway just because the underground tanks are all full of water and it wasn't even a bad storm. Something's wrong and in this area, and I think all through this region. So we're just going to have to figure out what we do.
This property used to be a swamp.
Yeah. And, everything's been built, but we're also, because of the way climate change works, where we have rain for longer periods of time at a time, it doesn't drain off naturally. It doesn't soak in the same way. And so it's not like it used to be as a swamp, it's worse.
Thinking back to Councilmember Smith's question about asking for money for property without knowing specifically what we're going to use it for.
Yeah.
Something like the Washington Adventist Hospital site might be the best site for a new municipal building. Well, how much money do we put into a property that's getting worse every year?
Well, I mean, I think we'll look and see. I mean, I don't know what the costs are going to be here. I think we have to look. It's affecting everybody here. But yeah, who knows? Maybe there's other options. Certainly, we've already, part of the discussion, even when talking about an elementary school on the hospital site, has included the concept that if it's a large enough elementary school, we could close Piney Branch, which is a really unsuitable building, and use that property for something that's better. And so there may be some nice solutions, community solutions, by having some flexibility with the various properties.
Of course, I make that suggestion on the same day that I'm continuing to try to repair my 1998 Honda Civic to keep it going.
Yep.
Thank you.
Reuse.
So on the library, so
Yeah.
the floodplain study was a step in the whole process.
Yep.
And so when you come back in a couple weeks with the floodplain implications, also then would you be able to give us some idea of how it affects the timing for the whole project?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
Thank you.
I mean, I think it may take a long time for us to determine that, but we certainly will have an initial indication if this is something doable in the sooner as opposed to not. We'll have the clue. We've talked some about economic development along New Hampshire Avenue, and as I mentioned, we are working with entities that are either interested in properties on New Hampshire Avenue or that are property owners about their plans. But real efforts are awaiting both direction on the economic development strategic plan and with the hiring of an economic development manager.
One thing I will say is the new Ave was actually brought up last night at the studio, and the students raised the question of what's happening with it. We looked at the internet and we are combing through everything, and we see it was done, but we don't really see. And they actually walked around and they sat in some of the businesses and they basically said we don't really see the branding in particularly the Crossroads area. And another question was around why are we focusing on Holton Lane? Because that, if you're really thinking about it, is probably not where the big commercial space would be. And so those questions kind of made me wonder, like, man, we should go back and really think about how, from a marketing perspective, a branding perspective, how are we using the new Ave branding? How does it relate to the Crossroads branding, especially now that we're talking about signage? And how can we meld it in a way that makes sense? And so I think that is something that we definitely should think about. And again, I understand that we're waiting for hiring, but I can't help but feel like there's a number of large projects that all work together, and would be perhaps a big job even even if you had a new staff. So just a few things to keep in mind as we're kind of thinking through this overall economic development strategy, because there are some aspects that folks are being asked to come up with ideas now, and it makes sense to kind of think about that longer term strategy in terms of branding and marketing of New Hampshire Avenue in the Crossroads area.
Absolutely.
Actually, this makes me, sorry, Councilwoman seriously just keeps, like, she speaks and I'll have all these ideas. Where it says lead entity, and you have the city, I think it also would be helpful to know what department within the city is working on that, because as you were speaking, completely agree with you. And then there's also thinking a lot of the things that we've been talking about falls on our Housing and Economic Development Department. And I think that's an important thing for all of us also to keep in mind. It's Housing and Economic Development and Public Works are where these large projects lie. And, you know, again, thinking about how large those departments are, I think that's also just a good reminder. It's not that we're the lead, the city, but it's like which department is in. I think if you looked at this list, it would probably be split almost in half between.
They have huge workloads, both, and a number of the things cross between them as well. I was just, I'll take that.
Good work leads to more work.
I know. I should never do this. We've had a lot of discussions recently about the redevelopment of the Tacoma Recreation.
Before we move on to that, every time I go past the 7-Eleven, I think I'm going to ask this question about the facade regulations that we talked about a few months ago, expanding them beyond the historic district. And so can we, you don't have to answer this now, but can we just put this on the list somewhere?
Yeah. I mean,
They went back to the committee, I thought.
Yeah, I think I have to go back.
Let's check on what
Where
the
it
next
went.
step is and see if we can look at taking it.
Okay.
Yep. So we should be coming back to you soon about information on the land transfer timing and steps, more specifically related to the New Hampshire Avenue Recreation Center.
Could I ask one question about that? In your mind, is it necessary to have that complete before we continue moving forward on trying to figure out, how we would solicit interest and so on? Because we know it's going to happen, but it sounded like from what the staff had said when we last looked into this or explored it publicly a couple of meetings ago, that it might take until spring to, just finish off all of that.
It's a staffing issue more than anything else.
Right.
It's not on our work program to be able to really do a lot of the outreach work and that kind of process. I think, on that one, I think it's, all we're really able to do right now is focus on the land transfer part.
Can I just put it like a little asterisk there? I think the last time council met and spoke about this, we were also, and tell us if this is possible with the capacity we have right now in the department, look at the potential cost of having an outside firm help us through the process.
That's right.
So that's something that could be done.
Right.
Yeah, we could look at, yes, that's on the, that was one of the asks.
Right, and I think that answers maybe Councilmember Kovar's question, which is, depending on what the cost of that would be and what that would involve, there could be.
If it's a routine matter of documents coming back and forth to do the land swap, but that just takes a while, if we can avoid having that nothing else happened during it. I guess that's what we're talking about. And, you know, I get the bandwidth question.
It's just a bandwidth.
Right.
It's primarily
But that's
that.
why I think the
Right,
mayor's
and
right.
that's what we
That's right.
said that the last
Yep.
time we met,
Yeah.
that could, yeah.
Thank you.
Just on the list was to continue to use Old Tacoma Business Association and the CDA to do some of our work with businesses, and when that's continuing. I've mentioned Washington Adventist Hospital. We've been coordinating meetings between the hospital officials and MCPS officials to consider the site for a new school. We'll be doing a tour coming up for the MCPS officials sometime mid-October, like October 13th or something like that. And I don't know where that will go as a concept, but at least we're having those discussions. Ethan Allen Streetscape, construction nearly complete. Most work is done. There's some lighting and some other kind of, a few sign and those kind of elements yet to be installed. But I was actually asking Daryl today that, you know, maybe we can think of some ribbon cutting or something fun that says hooray. So I'm not sure exactly the timing of something like that, but we need to celebrate when things are done, too.
It just stinks that 7-Eleven site is just.
Well, and yeah, so then it kind of points out how.
Shame them.
I know, it's terrible.
Sorry.
And then, last but not least, Montgomery College Math and Science Building and the design charrettes are continuing. There'll be a presentation coming to us. It is late November, right? And then I think they try to go to the state in December. So,
Yeah.
so that's moving forward. And fortunately, that's not requiring right now a lot of staff time, so I appreciate that.
Just council time.
That's right. Altogether, you know, there are things I didn't add to this list. These are kind of the major things. And as was mentioned, there's lots of ongoing work that we do as well that continues. We've been fortunate not to have too many storms and that kind of thing, but we're just, but we're, the rain really is annoying. It's slowing a number of things down. So hopefully we'll get to a time when we can catch up because pretty soon it'll be leaf collection season and some of the other kinds of things that take place that do take a lot of time of our staff.
I'd also like to just let I think the deputy city manager sent this around, but probably in like the last 6 or 8 months, there's a new page on the website, City Services, Your Dollars at Work, and it kind of outlines some of the other
Right.
services, like the basic ongoing, not what would come under here, but just like kind of everyday work that city staff does. And so I think that web page, along with this, provides a really good overview
Good.
of all the work that gets done in the city.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we could add to the city services page too.
You know, I think altogether, I'm proud that we're doing a lot of things. We juggle them pretty well. But I also want people to be aware that just because I didn't hear about something recently doesn't mean work's not being done on it. And so the more that we can kind of periodically share the information is helpful. And we'll see if we can present this in some other kind of format that with this additional information that might be useful for you.
Yeah. All right, well, it's 9:42. I think we're good. Thank you so much for this. I think it's really helpful information, and
We'll keep working on it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we're adjourned.